In this video, I'm going to talk about Isadora Duncan, who's considered by many to be the first real modern dancer. To get us started off, I'd like to read this amazing quotation from Duncan from 1903. I think it says a lot about where she was coming from and what her goals were in her art. "The dancer of the future will be one whose body and soul have grown so harmoniously together that the natural language of that soul will have become the movement of the body. She will dance not in the form of a nymph, nor fairy, nor coquette, but in the form of woman in its greatest and purest expression. She will dance the changing life of nature, showing how each part is transformed into the other. She will dance the freedom of women. She will dance the body, emerging again from centuries of civilized forgetfulness, no longer at war with spirituality and intelligence, but joining them in a glorious harmony." Duncan really believed in the body as a manifestation of the spirit. She believed that her dance was the expression of her soul, and that was sort of the ideal that she was really striving towards. She also talks about dancing as a woman, the female body being something that is not veiled in costumes or veiled in ideas about what a woman should be, but just the female body as you see it. She was really groundbreaking in dancing in very sort of minimal, revealing costumes that were inspired by ancient Greek togas. Although Loie Fuller, her predecessor in dance, had taken off the corset and was dancing in flowing clothing, Loie was still very covered in fabric, and she actually thought that Duncan was kind of vulgar or a little bit strange to be dancing with bare arms and bare legs. So that was very risque at the time, and Duncan was very aware of that, I think. It wasn't a sexual thing, it wasn't something to be attractive, it was just a kind of naturalness. She was all about naturalness. She depicted the rippling of water and leaves in the wind in her movements, in the way that she rippled her fingers or leaped and swayed back and forth, and she had a very kind of earthy, natural kind of style, and she was very interested in taking nature as a source of inspiration. She was also very inspired by ancient Greece, and she's been called the Greek dancer, or her style was quote-unquote Greek dancing. Now, what does this really mean? We don't really know what Greek dancing looked like, since there wasn't such a thing as film in 500 BC, but we have Greek vases and images and descriptions, and I think she really looked to the imagery of ancient Greece and the sort of idea of the human body as something to be celebrated rather than hidden away, and the kind of harmonious relationship between the mind and the body. The ideal person in ancient Greece was an Olympic athlete who was also a philosopher, so she loved that. But she didn't want to take American dance back into ancient Greece. She really wanted to take elements of ancient Greece that she found inspiring and kind of use those as fuel. Part of her idea of the sort of Greek look that she took on also came from Renaissance art. Botticelli's famous painting Primavera, Spring, hung in her childhood home, and later on commentators on her dancing noted that she looked like she had stepped out of a Botticelli painting, and she often wore flowers in her hair, and she was very sort of pastoral. Everything about her evoked a kind of Greek pastoral atmosphere. Critics spoke of a kind of very sensitive, nuanced interpretation of music in her dancing. But interestingly, Duncan felt somewhat limited by music. She felt that dance should be emancipated from music, and there should be such a thing as a pure dance art form without music. But that being said, she never really found a way to make that happen, and her work was very much an extension of music, a kind of reaction to the music, and she particularly felt attached to the music of Wagner and was invited by Wagner's widow, Cosima, to dance in one of Wagner's operas. And she did dance Wagner, and at the same time disagreed with his view that all of the different artistic disciplines should be melded together into a total artwork, which was Wagner's big philosophy. She totally disagreed with that, but at the same time, she kind of made it happen herself. What's really interesting to me about Isadora Duncan is that she was motivated by a kind of view of a nobler way of being. She was inspired by transcendentalist authors like Ralph Waldo Emerson and the great poet Walt Whitman, whose voice you can hear when you hear her writings and her speeches. She kind of sounds like Walt Whitman. She was really inspired by this kind of view of spirituality as all-encompassing and coming from nature. She was definitely not interested in the church and was sort of an atheist. So what did Duncan's dancing actually look like? From what we know, she had a very sort of naturalistic style. Her movements weren't very specialized. She skipped, she leaped and sort of used flowing arm gestures. She pointed, she made facial expressions. There was sometimes a kind of gestural narrative quality to her movement. And people have remarked that her movements themselves weren't that interesting. She wasn't a creator of highly intricate technical movements, and a lot of times she improvised. I get the sense that her works were not generally choreographed very tightly. They were very improvisational. But it wasn't her movements themselves that were interesting, it was her performance. It was an almost kind of trance-like performance. People who were in the audience talked about a kind of glow, a kind of energy of healthiness emanating from her. She had a kind of spiritual presence that people in audiences really responded to.